All right, we are privileged to have a special guest with us for this lesson. Her name is Jocelyne Melton, and I've known Jocelyne for a while. She's a great lady, a great leader, and she is the president and CEO of Baxter Environmental Group Incorporated. They are headquartered in Pennsylvania, and they service Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia. Did I get that right, Jocelyne?
Absolutely, yes. Yep.
Perfect. So, been in business about 35 years, and you are a certified indoor environmentalist, which means you can help educate us a lot on some of these common environmental hazards that people find in their homes or commercial properties. So, we're very thankful that you've joined us and are willing to share your expertise. So,
I,
anything
appre-
else you want to say?
I appreciate you having me. I really do. Thank you, Steve. And
Of
no, you
course.
pretty much covered it all.
Okay, perfect. So, for our listeners, we are going to be discussing mold, asbestos, lead-based paint, and duct cleaning, which are four of the things I know your company does a lot, and I know you do more as well. And we're going to be discussing some basic and not so basic facts about each of those topics, some common misconceptions, which is going to be a very important part of this lesson, and remediation practices, and then just some common questions that people have and the answers to those. So we'll start with mold, if that's okay.
My
Um,
favorite. But
yeah,
mold. So I think one of the things that people really have a challenge with is understanding mold inside, mold outside. Mold is everywhere all the time. Steve, if I were to come to your house and take a tape sample of your dining room table and one of my dining room table, they're both going to show that we have mold in our homes. That doesn't mean we have mold in our homes. Where mold becomes dangerous is when there's an elevation of the mold spores, and we're breathing those in. The other thing, too, that people need to understand is that for mold to grow, you need four basic components. You need a mold spore, which I just said is everywhere all the time. That's how we get mold in our homes. Um, Two, you need something for it to attach to. It needs a nutrient, something that it can eat, which in our homes is our regular everyday household dirt. And then the fourth thing, the most important thing, a mold spore will lay dormant and do nothing. It'll just sit there when you just have the three components. But when you add the fourth one, it's going to take off, and that is moisture. And people confuse what moisture is. They think you have to have had a water intrusion, and that's not true. High humidity. If I start bells and whistles start going off in our house if it goes over 50, but really, EPA says 60% or higher, mold will grow. That's all it needs is that humidity level for it to be able to grow. So the way to keep mold out of your home or from growing is there's three things: controlling humidity, controlling ventilation, and housekeeping practices. And I'm probably going to hit that a lot with all of this. A lot of people don't realize the value in the health of our environment when we have good housekeeping practices. It
I
isn't
think
just
the
about looking good. It's about keeping the house healthy.
Yeah, and I think out of the three you just mentioned, good housekeeping practices, keeping your home clean, pest-free, well-sealed, and so forth, is probably the most overlooked one in my
Mhm.
experience. You mentioned outdoor versus indoor, and I want to go back there for a second because it's important for people to know that when we do mold testing, which we do as well, we do a lot of it, we always do an outdoor sample as a control.
Correct.
And I tell everyone, think back to, seventh grade, eighth grade science fair, where you had a science project and you had to have a control for that experiment. It's the same thing with these tests. So we have to give the lab doing the test of the samples a baseline to go off of. And that's considered generally normal for the area. But we have had a couple of tests, not many, but a couple where even the outdoor levels were considered elevated and potentially problematic.
Mhm.
Usually, we found that's in really heavily wooded areas where there are a lot of spores and where there's a nearby lake, some resort type communities where there's the lake effect and so forth. But generally speaking, the outdoor sample comes back completely normal and usually lowest. And then the problematic levels are indoors. So,
Yeah, yeah. So Well, I think the shocking thing that a lot, especially when we hit our elderly, our older generation, is it's the comment, and this just like puts makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Um, it's just mold. No big deal. It's just mold. And I was raised in that era. So my dad was military. We moved every 2 or 3 years. So to keep our family stabilized, he bought a mobile home. So we always lived in the same mobile home, but just in different areas of the world. And I can remember my mom when she would clean once a week, and it was my brother and I's job to wipe the mold off the walls. The trailer leaked, and the moisture would build up, the humidity would build up, it would grow in the walls. And my mom said, it's just mold, just wipe it off.
Yeah.
So that was our job. My brother had adult asthma. I luckily did not suffer from it at the time. However, my immune system is now compromised. So I might catch things quicker than other people. So is that because of the mold on the walls? Who knows? But there is that chance. Um,
Yeah, I remember my grandma, even with bread, was something you'd eat.
mhm.
There'd be mold on it, and she'd say, "Oh, just tear out the mold, you're fine."
Yeah, you'll be fine.
So,
It's all the spores you're not seeing that's not fine.
right, and yeah, that goes back to the point. I think that our our understanding of this stuff has changed
Mhm.
over the years, and probably for the good in many ways. People used to just not be concerned about it at all. Now, I found, and I'm sure you have, there are some folks who are overly concerned. And they're,
Psychosomatic, and that's true. Anytime somebody's been traumatized, it just makes them
mhm,
so something's happened in their past that now
yeah,
there's some or personal susceptibility. Somebody that is sick from something else could possibly be more sensitive to mold, you know.
right, sure.
So yeah.
Or if they have bad allergies, upper
Hmm.
respiratory issues like asthma, COPD. We know that there are obviously people who are more susceptible, and each of us reacts differently to
Hmm.
some of this stuff, any environmental hazards.
I tell this story all the time. My husband could sleep in a pile of poison ivy and never catch it. My dog runs through the poison ivy and I get downwind from her and I'm going to get it from head to toe. That's the difference in personal susceptibility. My husband's not sensitive to poison ivy. I am.
Yeah,
So the same issue with mold.
yeah,
However, when they say that there's healthy levels of mold in a home, typically we're looking at somebody that has psychosomatic problems, or
mhm,
they're allergic to their dog. They're
yeah,
allergic to
right,
something else in the house. And that is the thing that we need to remember is that when it comes to identifying an indoor air quality problem, if somebody's sick, I mean, if they're really sick, there's something probably going on. And it's
yeah,
a process of elimination. Okay, so you eliminated mold. Take the dog to doggy daycare for a week. Let's see if that helps. If that doesn't help, then there probably should be some other tests running. If she just bought a new
mhm,
home, it could be something in the building materials. You just never
yeah.
know.
But to some common misconceptions, and we've already been discussing some of those, but one that I wanted to hit on is black mold, because people think that all black mold is one type, Stachybotrys,
Hmm.
and or Stacky for short, and that it's all extremely
Toxic.
toxic. And there are many, many different strains of black mold. Wanted you to touch on that a bit, some of these justified or exaggerated fears when it comes to black mold in
All
particular.
right. So somebody sees black mold in their building. My first reaction is don't panic. It doesn't mean it's Stachybotrys. Mold can be different colors for different reasons. And you just mentioned one of them, the type of mold it is. How much air is it getting? How much moisture is it getting? How old is it? It can be so many different reasons that mold is black. And the only way you know for sure is to test it.
Yeah.
The thing that I compliment people on is you found mold, you still need to do something about it because no matter what type it is, mold should not be in your home, should not be growing in your home or your building. It means that there's a moisture problem. There's something else, going on there that we've got to be taken care of. And a lot of people think the only mold that's going to make them sick is Stachybotrys, and that again is not true. there are toxic molds of many different types, number one. And number two, we're back to personal susceptibility. What one type of mold might make you sick and not make me sick, and vice versa. It's getting those, you're going to have spores in the air anytime there's a mold colony. So it's getting rid of the mold colony that's important.
Yeah. Back to one important thing you said, which is you don't know without testing.
Mhm.
This is true for all of this stuff we're discussing and that I'll be discussing in other lessons, including radon. You have no idea if your radon average concentration is 1.2 picocuries per liter or 78.9 unless you do a test.
Unless you test.
And just because your neighbor did a test doesn't mean that you're going to be similar. Likely, yes, but
Mhm.
your neighbor can have a completely different level in their home. We're not talking in this lesson in particular about radon. We are in another one, but it's just important to know.
I had a couple of people like, why am I sensitive to mold in my house, but I wasn't in the farmhouse that I was raised in? And that has a lot to do with what you're talking about. If the our farmhouses, our older houses, they were not tight. They were not
Mhm. They
sealed.
can breathe.
They could breathe, so the spores could go in and out and in and out. And
Mhm.
they never, because the wind blew under the door and across the house to the other side, they never had a chance to attach to anything. Um,
Yeah.
when the 70s and well, I remember this really well because I was having kids at that point in time. In the 70s, everything became energy efficiency. So we tightened everything up. Well, now we are trapped in the environment with these hazards, and that is a big difference between 50, 100 years ago and
Yeah.
today. We want that energy efficiency. Having tight buildings gives us control, but we have to respect that control and do something about it. Make sure that our HVAC system is well balanced. Make sure that we have great housekeeping practices, because now that spore, when it gets into the building component, gets the nutrient that it needs, it's going to blossom because there's no air blowing it around. Does
Mhm.
that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I have that conversation with people all the time. I tell them, our great granddads really knew how to build houses. They were built very durable with true two by hard lumber that came from old growth forests and square nails, but they weren't energy efficient at all.
Mhm.
And modern properties aren't built really quite as solidly, but the whole paradigm is shifted towards energy efficiency. And the goal behind that, of course, is to create a better, tighter environment that can be better controlled, but it has its pros and its cons. So, and now that we're trying to go even more to net zero for energy efficiency, you have things like fresh air intakes because you have to have a way to allow the house to breathe with a filter, and just things like that. I know we're going to be talking about that here in a bit, but maintaining filters at forced air HVAC systems, furnaces, things like that go a long way to help with that control. But yeah, a lot of interesting truths and untruths and common misconceptions about mold. And I guess the bottom line is, if we know that we have it, we need to do something about it. So let's talk about when is it appropriate for a homeowner or a building owner in general, or a maintenance supervisor, etc., to try and go it alone and DIY mold remediation versus hiring a professional company like you guys
Mhm.
to do the work.
So, just an FYI, there's no laws right now about mold. So anybody can legally do the mold remediation. It's just like though anybody could, you could go to anybody for medical advice, but does that mean that they're going to give you good advice? So
Mhm.
it's that line, when you're going into that line where you're really not sure what you're doing, that's when you want to call the professional. Or when the job's really big, you might taking in a professional. The basics to mold remediation is get rid of the mold, which sometimes means demolition. scrub it, elbow, you got to get the mold out. So cleaning it up. So demolition, cleaning it up, HEPA vacuum, clean, HEPA vacuum. Um, it's getting all those spores out of there. Now that sounds so simple, but it's really not. And protecting yourself while you're doing it and protecting the rest of the building while you're doing it. There's so many things that people don't think about. For instance, when you're demolishing the walls that the mold's in or behind, that's stirring up all those spores, which is getting sucked into your HVAC system, or it spores can hang in the air for 24 to 48 hours or longer, sometimes even longer, and that can spread throughout the entire building. So making sure you have great containment, making sure that the people that are removing it are properly geared up. Um, if we're talking about the black dots on the top of your shower from mold, then get out some scrub and bubbles and clean it up, or Dawn
Hmm.
dish liquid and clean it up. But
Yep.
when we start talking about demoing things, when we start seeing that the mold is actually rooted, that's when it's really good to have a professional come in. Did that answer your question, Steve?
It did. I am curious, by the way, to get your thoughts on whether or not to use bleach as part of a mold cleaning process, because I have heard conflicting theories about that,
So
and you're one of the best experts I know on the topic.
I
So,
lean towards the belief that bleach should not be used.
most
And the
professionals I know agree with that.
and
So,
it's understanding how bleach operates. So bleach is great for getting the color of mold, the staining from mold out of your building. So, but the chemical evaporates really quick and leaves moisture behind. And what does mold love?
moisture.
Exactly. So if somebody's not properly using the chemicals, then that could end up causing a bigger problem.
Yeah.
And that brings up another thing that I really want to say about mold. Mold remediation, whether somebody is a DIY, do it yourself, or if they are going to hire a professional, addressing the source of the problem first is imperative.
Hmm.
We did this mold job, this basement in West Virginia. That was a home sale. So we went in, we cleaned it up, we did passing post samples, we hooked up dehumidification, drained the dehumidification into the sub pump so that they could leave and not have to worry about it. And they decided they wanted to save money on electricity and unplug the sub pump and the dehumidifier. So
Oh,
guess what they
geez.
had 2 weeks later? That solved the source of the problem, and they totally disconnected it. And
Yeah.
so two
Well,
weeks later, they're calling us, you didn't clean up the mold. There's mold again. You did something wrong. And when our inspector showed up, they didn't even try to cover it up. They didn't try to plug anything in. So understood that they never really were listening to the reason
mhm.
you have mold is because you have moisture. We're going to eliminate the cause of the moisture and then clean up the mold and keep that elimination in place. So,
Yeah.
so very important. Why do you have mold? Get that question answered first, because mold only takes 12 hours to root. And you can have a
Hmm.
full contamination in 24, 48 hours. You could have every single wall, ceiling covered with mold.
And as far as that goes, anytime somebody has obviously had a flood issue, maybe they're in a floodplain, maybe not. Maybe there is a once in 100 years weather event, just a total anomaly, and they get water in their basement, standing water. It's prevalent. They have to pump it out. And assume then that I tell people, assume that you probably are going to have a mold issue, and it's at least worthwhile having a test done. And for that matter, when remediation work is performed, there should be testing afterwards, some post
Absolutely.
mitigation work to verify that the work was successful, right?
Yeah,
So,
typically when our post, I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but
no,
typically
you're
when
fine.
I get excited, when our post mitigation sampling or clearance sampling fails, it's because there's a mold colony somewhere that we didn't know it was there or we missed it.
Yeah, and it's so easy because you might have water getting into the basement corner in a finished basement, and you can see visible, probably a type of black mold on the drywall. You go, okay, I'm just going to remove the drywall, which tends to, I think, be the easiest solution when it comes to drywall that's impacted. Is just demo it, get that out of there.
Yes.
Not that hard to replace, right? And the importance of using more moisture resistant drywall in
Mhm.
below grade spaces. But there could always be other mold colonies in different areas that are concealed. They're not readily apparent and visible. So you just never know until
No,
you do that
definitely.
test. It's been my experience that a lot of times some of these companies do give really outrageous quotes. Now, if it's an issue you mentioned earlier where it's a widespread problem and it's a big
Mhm.
job, it's going to be expensive, right? There's no
Right,
way around that. It's
right.
going to be many thousands of dollars in some cases. And it's because the job doesn't just entail cleanup, it may entail demo and taking all kinds of precautions, set up, right? The
Just the respirators cost companies respirator program. The OSHA's watching us, so there's so many things that people don't realize that go into having a professional company do it. It
Yeah.
isn't just the training, it's also all the equipment, all the supplies.
One nice thing is a lot of these dehumidifiers now will have auto settings,
Mhm.
and a lot of them I think are at about 50%. So maybe a little bit higher, but you mentioned 60% and up as a threshold before, even though we know we can still have it if we're a little bit
Well, when it
lower,
rains, it's going to
right?
automatically be
Yeah,
65% in your home. Yeah,
yeah,
that's normal, but you just don't want it to stay that way.
right. Yeah, so hopefully that is plenty of helpful information on the mold front. Um,
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all
You're
that. And
welcome. I could
yeah,
talk about mold all day. There's so much to know, but
yeah,
I will end with this. The EPA puts out a really good brochure. So for somebody that's really curious, and for our realtors out there, this is a great handout. It's called Mold Moisture and Your Home. I think even facilities managers would appreciate it because it's the basics. 15-minute read, and people will know everything they need to know to protect themselves from mold.
perfect. Thank you.